Okay, I think we're good. I see several folks logging in. So I am JC Abu Said. I'm the CEO and president of Halbert Hargrove, and I have the pleasure of introducing today Adam Mosley and Patrick Hennessy. They're both directors of business consulting and education at Schwab Advisor Services. They've been instrumental and very supportive of the firm and helping us become more secure and more focused on all the threats that today advisors are facing. Specifically, I want to thank them. In the fourth quarter of 2024, they worked together with Shane, who, let me introduce Shane. He is our wealth advisor and director of technology and cybersecurity. Uh, but anyway, we worked with Schwab and Shane and our chief compliance officer. The purpose of the project was to focus on our policies, our procedures, our workflows, our systems, and just to make sure we were buttoned up as much as we could. We can't be 100%, but we feel much more confident today that we had a third party look at everything we do and make sure it was buttoned up. Today's session is going to be interactive, so we welcome questions, of course. Please use the Q&A box to load your questions. We also got questions ahead of the virtual event, so we have those documented. And with that, I just want to, the last housekeeping item I want to say is that we will record the meeting, make it available afterwards so that if you missed it by any chance, you get to see it again. And with that, and without further ado, please take it away, Shane.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to give Patrick and Adam an opportunity just to make some comments here. And then as we jump in, we want to make this as useful as possible for everybody. It's a really great, unique opportunity to hear from some experts in the cyberspace. So I'm going to be monitoring questions that are submitted, and we will try to answer those dynamically. So anything that you want to ask, feel free to pop that into the Q&A box. We're going to start with a couple topics we have, and then we'll be dynamic with how we answer the other questions that come in. And hopefully we'll answer all of your burning topics that you want to hear about. And we hopefully can educate everybody on issues we're facing right now. So Patrick, I think you had some comments you wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shane, and thank you, JC, for the kind introduction. It has been a pleasure to work with your firm. And Adam and I are part of a business-to-business unit within Schwab called Schwab Advisor Services. So it's always a treat for us when we get to be in front of clients of our clients. We appreciate the interest that all of you have in this really important topic. And like they both said, Adam and I look forward to answering as many of your questions as possible. So I hope that you brought your questions or think of them. Do submit them through that Q&A feature. Again, we're delighted to be here. Adam?
Yeah, I just want to thank the team at Halbert Hargrove for having us on today, and for the nearly 40 of you that are on the line with us today. Just by the last I looked here, and perhaps even some of you are with other family members. Today is, in fact, a really unique opportunity, not just to hear from us, as Shane said, but also to ask the questions that you have. So I do hope that you won't be shy about those. Both Patrick and I are super excited to hear about what's on your minds. So as we've mentioned, use that Q&A feature. And I believe we aim to answer as many of your questions as we have time for today. So with that, let's get out of the way and get on with it, Shane.
All right, thank you. Well, just to get us started at a high level, can you talk a little bit about the risks and the threats that we're seeing out there, just in the cybersecurity space in general?
Certainly. And, you know, from our position here at Schwab, we see a lot. We get reports from firms like yours. We get reports from end clients, like the folks on the line. So we have that in addition to, you know, all that we hear about in the news and all that we face as individuals. But I would say it really comes down to a couple of things. It comes down to a lot of fraud that we're facing. And I want to distinguish that from scams. They're interrelated, and they both tend to stem from some sort of information security or cybersecurity breach or intrusion, or just our own sometimes sloppy or negligent behavior. But first of all, we're seeing fraud, and fraud can come down to someone fraudulently impersonating you to try and get at your information or to try and get at your assets. So that's one big category of things that we're seeing. We're seeing a tremendous amount of scams. Now, with frauds, you don't necessarily have to be involved. With scams, though, you're often an unwitting participant. So someone is playing you, they're using psychology and social engineering tactics to try and get something from you, typically information that they then can leverage to get at your money, your assets. And both frauds and scams, again, tend to be rooted in cybersecurity breaches or intrusions. So that means these folks are trying to get little morsels of information that they can use to do greater damage. And so these cyber or information security intrusions can be getting into your email account, which is probably the #1 attack vector that we see. And there are also things that we do, and we'll elaborate on email, of course, because it is so important, but there are also some things that we do that aren't necessarily about the bad guys attacking us and trying to get in to our great perimeter defenses, but things that we do ourselves that, again, they might be negligent or sloppy. We might overshare information or be too cavalier with how we protect our information. So that just paints a picture for a little of what we're up against. And we've got some examples we can share of some of these as well. Adam, anything you would add to that, or I can certainly share some of the types of scams and fraud that we've been seeing.
Yeah, go ahead and share a little bit, Patrick, on what we're seeing.
We've seen everything from folks getting the call supposedly from the sister or the grandchild. Typically, these happen at 2 or 3 in the morning. They wake a person up, they surprise the individual, and the person on the other end of the line doesn't even have to sound like your relative, because they'll often say, well, I'm so-and-so, but I was in a car accident and I'm in the hospital, and that's why I don't sound like I usually do, but I need some money. And we're seeing all sorts of people fall for that. I'm an acquaintance of a professional in her 30s who actually works in our business and financial services, who fell for that because, again, the element of surprise, she thought it was her sister calling in the middle of the night. The next morning, in hindsight, it was obvious that it wasn't her sister. She was only out about $50 to $100 in gift cards, but it just goes to show that this sort of thing can happen to everyone. We're also seeing combination scams. Think investment and romance scams together. We see these particularly among older individuals, widows, or other single folks who might be approached by someone, and they like the attention, they like the company, and they think that this individual truly has a compelling investment idea. Often these are interrelated, and we've seen some cases where I'm thinking of one individual in particular. She sent a series of wires over the course of several months, $200,000 or so at a time. It added up to over $1 million. All sorts of red flags were going off. Our investigators got involved, reached out to this individual to try and get some information and stop it if it was indeed fraudulent. And the individual actually refused to cooperate with us. She just did not want to believe that she was the victim of a scam. She thought the individual on the other end of the line was genuine, who had brought her some bona fide investment ideas, and she also thought she might have a future with this individual. So, those are just some of the things we're seeing, and unfortunately, there are a lot more examples like that.
Yeah, thank you. I agree that email is definitely a major vector. We've seen that as well at our firm. Changing gears a little bit here, we got a question from Douglas, and he asked, should we use a personal password vault like 1Password? Is there any additional advice if using a password vault? Which I think is a great question. So I think passwords and password managers is a good topic as well.
Patrick, can I get us started? And
Sure.
Okay, so thank you very much for that question. And before we go straight to password managers, how about Patrick and I start with some best practices on first how to think about passwords. Back some time ago, there was a lot of complexity in how we thought about passwords. We were told we need to change them every 90 days. We were told they have to be incredibly complex and contain characters of all different types. And a lot of that guidance led to some bad behavior. So the first thing I want to give you is just very general and straightaway best practices on what your password should look like. They should be two things. They should be long. That means in an ideal situation, you have a 15 character password. 12 is okay too. 8 is really not okay anymore. And the password should be unique in nature. Now, the length is important because as the bad actors or fraudsters, whatever we choose to call them today, they have technology that they can often use to guess or crack a password. And if that password is 6 or 8 characters, it might be able to be guessed in a matter of minutes using this technology, yet simply pushing it to 12 or 15 characters using that same technology, it could take years or in some cases even decades. So length of your password is really important. The other one I mentioned is that your password is unique, and that is very important as you think about these sensitive platforms that you use for transacting business, exchanging information, and so on. So these include file sharing websites you might use, cloud services you might use, your email, of course, anything financial related, and so on. In an ideal situation, you are not using that password for that provider with any other website, at all. Each of those websites would have its own unique password. And where this is important is because when you hear of a breach or an incident where our passwords were exposed, our user IDs and passwords, what the bad actors do is they go and sell that information back and forth to one another over the internet. They will use that information, our user IDs and passwords, they'll plug it into technology that in an instant can go out and test that user ID and password on dozens or hundreds of different websites. And very often they're able to get in because we've reused our password. So that's where that's really important. Now, if your passwords are longer and if your passwords are unique, that means you're going to have exponentially more of them. So what do? A lot of folks will write them down and keep them in a secure place. At some point, many of us get to a point where we see that as inefficient or maybe not as secure as using the technology that this individual asked about. And those are what are called password managers. These are tools that you can purchase in the various app stores. You do want to purchase them. They should not be software that you're taking for free. You want to pay a good few dollars a month for some of these, but these platforms, the commercial grade ones, are fantastic. They will store our passwords. They will secure our passwords. They are deeply encrypted. They will police our passwords. They'll let us know if we're reusing a password. They'll let us know if a platform has had a compromise and they recommend we should go in and change that password. And they're also fantastic at generating passwords. So Patrick and I, others on our team, we use these. We've used them for a very long time. I let go of knowing my passwords years ago. I couldn't tell you my Schwab password if I needed to here today with all of you. It's something I forgot a while ago, and it's stored in a password manager. There are a number of them that are available. I know that we're going to get a question on what are some of the ones we would recommend. I'll give you a couple bits of guidance on that. One, I think you want to look for one that is very widely adopted. We're talking hundreds of thousands, millions of users. You're looking for ones that are very highly rated. So you're looking for 4.5 stars in the app stores. But if you plug in those sort of parameters, you'll come across names like 1Password. That's the number 1, and then password, or Dashlane is another that's very good. LastPass, it's been in the area for years. We see that all the time. In fact, many advisors use LastPass. And there are others. Some of us use iCloud from Apple for that, and so on. They're all great tools. Now, these solutions, because of the value of the information you're putting in them, need to be very well secured as well. So you want to make sure that you have a very good and strong long password that you're using to secure these tools. And then along with passwords and good password hygiene, you want to be thinking about using what is available on any and every commercial grade platform available to you today and that's something called multi-factor or two-factor authentication. Now that means in addition to your user ID and password, you're using one other thing, and that might be something as simple as the platform recognizing the computer that you're logging in from, and that's a trusted device on their system. It could be a code that's generated from another app or a message that's sent to you. In the event it's trying to log in from a computer it doesn't recognize. But it's very important that you're using multi-factor or two-factor authentication everywhere it's made available to you. Because in the event our passwords are ever exposed, it's this and only this that's going to keep the bad actors out of our accounts there. Patrick, what might you add in the area of password hygiene and best practices there?
Really just emphasizing a couple of things you said about the password manager itself. So if you choose a good password manager, and in addition to those that Adam mentioned, I happen to use what was formerly Keychain from Apple. Keychain's still there, but now they've rolled out what they call passwords, which is a little more user-friendly in my view. So I happen to use my personal life passwords through my Apple devices. I think it's really important for the password manager itself, for you using the password manager to set that really long, typically passphrase to protect the password manager itself. And in an ideal world, that passphrase for your password manager might be the only password you're actually remembering. So that could be that we're using the term passphrase. That could be a series of words, maybe that's 7 to 8 words in a row chosen at random that you just string together. And if you think about the average length of a word, 5 or 6 characters, you're in the ballpark of maybe 40 to 45, somewhere 35 to 45 length passphrase to protect your password manager, and turn on multi-factor authentication if your password manager allows for it.
Thanks, Patrick. Linda submitted a question asking how safe password managers are. I think you just answered that, and I would double endorse what you just suggested, which is the password manager itself having MFA is really important, as well as a strong password.
Yep.
Yeah, and folks have asked about the security of password managers because obviously they are rich targets, but there tend to be a lot of resources around protecting them and a lot of encryption at play. So there had been some publicized, I would say, minor breaches that typically have not exposed people's passwords themselves, just other perhaps metadata that hasn't been too helpful. So by and large, security researchers say if these systems can help you choose long, unique passwords, and if you're like me, you have maybe 200 different sets of credentials, you're going to be better off using one of these than having a whole set of simpler and reused passwords without the use of a manager.
Yeah, I think back in the old days, people might have had a spreadsheet that had their passwords in them. Maybe a while back that was sufficient. I think that that time has passed now, and certainly the ability to have a system generate strong, unique passwords for you saves a lot of work and also enhances your security. So Carrie had a related question. He asked, or I'm sorry, or maybe she asked, how often do you recommend that we change our password?
Yeah, Adam mentioned that the guidance here has changed. At one point, maybe 20 years ago, up to just a few years ago, it was change them on some sort of regular basis. At least it was that way in the workplace. But that was when passwords, by and large, had to be smaller. Some systems couldn't take passwords longer than 8 characters. So we had to use 8, no more than 8, and they had to be upper, lowercase symbols, numbers, all that, and we had to change them frequently to mix them up. But with systems able to handle much longer passwords, sometimes into the low hundreds of characters, if you have a long and unique password, some security researchers these days are saying there's no reason to change it unless you have reason to believe it has been compromised. And if you think that there is just something incredibly important, maybe your email account password that you would just feel better about changing, again, make it long, make it unique, and perhaps change it every year or two if that makes you feel better.
Great. And we have kind of another related follow-up here, kind of diving a little bit more into multi-factor authentication. question aimed more for Halbert Hargrove. And the question is, do we provide, or will we be providing or recommending an authenticator for MFA? I do feel like this is a good idea these days. I'll also be interested in your thoughts, but I know there's a lot of different factors, a lot of different options for multi-factor authentication. In the past, text message or SMS authentication has been prevalent. I think now we're starting to move away from that for better security. But at least based on what we do here at Halbert Hargrove, I think authenticator or token-based authentication for MFA is really, really strong. I would typically endorse anywhere the way you load it, you scan a QR code, which is stored in either your phone or perhaps that password manager, since they have that capability now, where on top of the saved password, it also has a time-based code that rotates typically every 30 seconds. And when you set that form of MFA up, I think it's very powerful, and also lessens your chance of that MFA being compromised. So I'd also be interested in your guys' take on MFA and token-based authenticators.
Do not disagree at all. Shane, I would agree with that. Yeah, we too believe that token-based or app-based authentication methods are superior, but I would also say that any multi-factor is better than no factor at all. So, and sometimes there are some providers that I work with, or some platforms or websites that I have a user ID and password to, where I don't have a choice. One might force me to use Authenticator. One might force me just to select a box to recognize the computer that I'm on as a trusted device. And maybe another one wants to send me a text message. And while I might not be as much of a fan as the SMS or text base, it's still better than nothing. So I'll take what I can get there when I don't have a choice in the matter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so for those of you who are presented with the choice, you need to turn on multi-factor for some website or app. If you're given a choice, I'd be inclined to go with email over SMS and probably an authenticator app over email if I have one at my disposal. And there's also sometimes a backstop or another option available, and sometimes these are referred to as backup codes, where you can save a PDF on your device that has backup codes you can use. That can also be a viable option as well.
Yep. And maybe I'll just add, no matter the platform we're talking about, enabling this multi-factor is most often found inside of the security settings. They purposely make it not very hard to find. You just got to go to the security settings of that platform and look for something called multi-factor or two-factor authentication and simply enable it.
Yeah, great. I know Apple, I think, requires multi-factor, which is good.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Google does as well now for Gmail. But I think whatever your primary email is that you're going to use, you definitely want to have the highest security setup there. Because like you're saying, if that becomes your backup, if you have to get a recovery code or something, you always want to make sure you can access that email account. Or a specific device, like if you use an Apple phone, they may send backup codes to that, or that may be how you recover other systems. So it's really important to have as much security as possible, especially if that's the device you store maybe your passwords on, or your MFA app, or any of all of that at the same time.
That's right, Shane. Yeah, email is at the very top of the list of one of the most important things that we can secure. You know, some platforms, as you said, they're going to use that email to try to authenticate or validate who they're talking about. So if a bad actor already has access to your email account because they were able to get in, they're able to circumvent a lot of the security apparatus that's been put together. So that's usually the very first that we recommend folks go and secure.
Yeah. I can share a quick anecdote on SMS, kind of a reason why, and by the way, I'm not disagreeing with your point. Having SMS as multi-factor is better than not having it. But what we experienced at our firm, we had somebody who took their phone, to the gym with them. Somebody broke into their gym locker, popped the SIM card out of their phone, and as soon as that happened, they were no longer able to get text messages or phone calls, and they can take that SIM card, pop it into another device, potentially get calls and messages routed to that new device, which that they then may use to try to hack your accounts, or at least get up to different types of no good, essentially.
That's right.
So let's see, we got another question here. Is HH considering putting the secondary authentication into the HH app the way that Schwab does with their mobile app? So that's a good question. We do have a custom mobile app now that's through one of our technology vendors. I don't believe they have that option now. That's definitely something we've been asking for, and hopefully they will support in the future. But I believe that's going to be going through some updates later this year. So my hope is we'll see some enhancements there as well. But it's definitely something with any of our vendors that we use that we're always asking for or sharing that feedback to enhance security as much as possible. And related with our portal, anything that is client facing, we always also try to limit the information in that system that's client facing as much as possible. So if it ever were to be hacked or breached, the theory being that the bad guys wouldn't be able to pull much of use out of that system. So that's also one of the things we're doing, which is we don't want all client data in any of our systems available on the web. We want to limit strictly what's in there as much as possible. So one thing I think about a lot is if any of our systems are breached, what would that mean? What would that look like? We always want to reduce the risk as much as possible by having as little information potentially in play as possible.
Shane, if I might add, there's a nuance in something you shared there that reinforces the importance of using portals over email for communicating. So when we're using a portal to exchange sensitive information, the whoever's controlling that portal has tremendous capabilities to purge it of data, set timeframes of how long information can be out there. They have control over the types of credentials that are used to log in and so on. When email is used to exchange that same information, all bets are off. It's really no more difficult than someone gaining access to any one of our email accounts to see everything that we've ever sent for as long as we've had that email account, or what we might have filed, or what might be in our inbox and so on. So both Patrick and I, the rest of the team, we're always, when given the opportunity, very purposeful in saying, please do your best not to share sensitive information over email. Try to avoid it and use portals like the ones we're talking about here, that the firm uses whenever possible.
Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, we use a system when we share data with clients and prospects, especially if it contains account numbers, or it might be like a custodial form or something like that.
Yeah.
The way we typically do that is with links that expire and self-destruct. So even if somebody were to get into your email and hack your email, for example, they went back and looked at your sent items or your deleted items, all they'd be able to do is click on a link that's now dead that would give them no access to files. So that's one thing we've done proactively to kind of address exactly your point there.
Outstanding.
And Shane, I see a couple of questions coming in. I want to get
Yep.
to them, but let's finish off this email topic. We started by saying email is one of the primary attack vectors or ways that bad guys have to get into our lives, into our information, and then use that to their advantage. And so Adam talked about protecting your email account like you would protect your Schwab Alliance account, for example. Consider it to be one of the most important to protect. I would sum up what I just heard between the two of you as email is really like a postcard. And if there's information that you would not write on a postcard and drop in the mail for everyone along the way to see, don't put that information in an email either. That's when you really want to turn to some sort of secure portal. And then finally, beware of phishing. You know, it used to be that the spam, the unwanted ads we were getting in our email were just annoying marketing. But often now what we're seeing is that those get filtered out, and some of what's left in our inbox are actually quite malicious. They're not just annoying unwanted ads. They contain links or attachments that, if we interact with them, will compromise our systems and give bad actors access potentially to our email account or to our devices. And email is particularly challenging because we've gotten used to acting very quickly with it. And so the message really is slow down, think, and especially slow down and think before clicking, opening any attachments, clicking on any links. You can always hover over where a link might take you and see if it matches up to where you expect it to go. You can consider if you're expecting this sort of email from this particular sender. And if in doubt, just delete it. Delete it without engaging with it whatsoever. And by the way, do the same with text messages or WhatsApp or Signal messages or anything that's coming in. I mean, occasionally we get these that just say hello, or, you know, I know what's making the rounds these days, at least in California. I'm not sure out in the Chicago area where you are, Adam, but we're getting the toll violation notice via text. You know, this is garbage. Delete it. If you can, delete it and report it as junk, but do not engage. And try not even to open and read the email, the text or email for that matter.
Yeah, in fact, I've got several of those tollway messages. So it's funny you mentioned that. You know, a nuance in something that Patrick had shared is, you know, take a different approach, a different posture as you think about email altogether. We suggest you consider email and all of it guilty until you prove that it's innocent. And that might sound a bit extreme, and I think it is, but what that mentality or that approach will do, it will in fact slow you down. And if you slow down, you will undoubtedly catch things that look off. And that could be who it's from as you wave your mouse over that address on who it's from, and it looks nothing like who you were expecting it to be from. Or when you carefully read the body of the email and you notice spelling errors, punctuation errors, how things are worded, how you are approached in that email. These are all things that you'll spot, but when you're moving very quickly, you can miss them all together. And then the last, you know, bit of a pro tip I'll give you is if you're in the habit of unsubscribing from emails, that's that little link at the bottom that says unsubscribe. I'll tell you that most of the time that's okay. However, you got to know that the bad actors have been using that as well as a method for identifying you as a target, potentially routing you out to another website where you're entering more information. So it's best not even to unsubscribe from an email. Instead, and no matter what email platform you use, you'll have this. Simply drag that email into your junk folder, or it might be called spam on the system you're using. But as you move emails in there, the next time an email comes from that particular sender or that looks that way, or comes from that particular domain even, it'll move that into junk automatically. And then you can just review that once a week. And you know, my process is I look at junk every few days. Just about everything in there gets deleted, and it works very, very well. On the text messages, some of you will notice that as you receive some of these toll messages that Patrick mentioned, or other spam or junk or even malicious text messages, you'll have an option at the bottom that says delete and report. And you can select that, and it will delete it from your text messages altogether, and it'll report it to the provider that you're using, and that helps just generally clean up the system and keep others or yourself from getting that again.
Hey, Shane, if you'd like,
Thanks, Adam.
I'll take some of
Sure.
these questions. A couple have come in from Linda. So let me start with Linda asking about, is it a good idea to keep your email open, or should you log out each time or periodically? I say on your trusted devices, it's okay to leave it open. It's always open on my laptop. It's certainly always connected on my phone. Of course, my phone is encrypted. It requires a passcode or my face to get into my phone. So I think that that's okay. Obviously, be cautious about logging in from other devices that you don't control. You know, shared devices. Anything that might be public in nature, there I would strongly encourage you not to log into sensitive applications, including your email. Before we get, Linda, to your other question, there was a quick one just about Bitwarden. Carrie, you asked for our opinion. I would say Bitwarden easily could have made the list of 4 or 5 that Adam enumerated along with the one I mentioned from Apple. So yeah, hear good things about it. Seems to have a lot of users. No reason for us to omit that from the list.
Yeah. And Patrick, if I may, I want to add one thing to Linda's question about leaving applications open, and I do that as well. And some of the websites that I'll go to will auto log out. But one thing to be aware of is make sure that that computer is secure. So for example, as you step away from that computer, after a few number of minutes, it should lock on you and require your password or your fingerprint or your face recognition, whatever method you're using to log into that computer. You want to make sure that that's activated so that you're not just leaving that machine completely unsecure and open with access to your email for all that time.
Yeah, I think on that topic, one thing that I've read is becoming more prevalent, if you've got an iPhone, is people looking over your shoulder, maybe in a public place, to see what passcode you're typing in. So having a strong passcode on your device is important. So you're not just, say, typing 1, 2, 3, 4 to unlock it, because somebody maybe in a restaurant or airport or somewhere might see you type that in. Let's say you put your phone down, you walk away from it, they grab it, type that in, go into your account, change the password, you're locked out of your account, and then they can get up to a lot of damage that way. So device security, really important. And then maybe just real quick, if you guys have any comments just on making sure you're doing things like software updates that, seem mundane but are still important.
Absolutely. Yeah. So someone asked when they registered for this event, what's the most often overlooked risk? And Adam and I were talking about that, and it's almost like there's not a single most often overlooked risk. It's all the little things that add up. And so, I've had a conversation very recently with a firm like yours, Shane, where we talked about pushing out software updates in a centralized, automated manner in the workplace so that individuals don't have to ask for these updates themselves or check for them and apply them. And, to the extent that we can do that in our personal lives, set our software to auto update. My wife thinks I'm nuts probably, but I'm checking both our phones probably multiple times a day, swiping. Are there app updates? Like, I want to apply them immediately. Where you can set them to auto update, please do. Don't forget about all those Internet of Things devices, the IoT devices. So what I mean by that is all of our connected devices that used to not be connected. So our video doorbells, our thermostats, on and on, in some cases, refrigerators these days, but any devices, including your routers, your Wi-Fi routers, check these things for firmware updates where you can set them to auto update. It's so incredibly important. There are statistics out there that show that a lot of the damage from viruses and malware are targeting software where patches have actually been available for 90 days or more. So if you apply in a timely manner these software updates, you'll be better protected against some of the bad stuff going around.
And the one thing I'll add is that, in fact, iOS 18.4 is in its release candidate mode right now. That means an update is imminent for all of us running iPhones out there. There's going to be some great new features that come along with that, but that's actually not why this updating is important. There are dozens and sometimes hundreds of security patches contained in these updates, very specifically designed to plug known gaps that have been found since the last update. So that's what you're getting by updating those devices, is you're securing and closing up those gaps there. And the bad actors for years, they have ways of targeting those machines or those devices that haven't been kept updated. They're specifically looking for those, that haven't updated their PCs, their Macs, or their mobile devices. So best to stay up with those, as Patrick mentioned, as well as you can.
Yeah, and I'll mention one thing real quick. At Halbert Hargrove, we have a centralized patch management system. So we're pushing out all those for Windows devices, servers, the corporate-owned iPhones that we use. I strongly endorse the auto update features. I think it's also important if you've got an old computer or an old phone that is no longer receiving updates, that's a really good time to consider updating the device, which I know a lot of people don't like doing. That can be kind of uncomfortable, but still very important, kind of exactly to the reasons you were just describing.
Great point, Shane. I've got probably one of the older iPhones out there and a 10R, but it's still receiving updates. And you're right, when it no longer receives updates or when it falls and breaks, I'll replace it. But that's a good segue into something else we should do to protect our data. Someone asked, and I'll tie this into Linda's other question, but someone asked when they registered, how do I keep my data secure? Well, one of the things you can do is when devices are at the end of their useful lives, your laptops, your personal phones, whatever, before you recycle them, gift them to your children or grandchildren, donate them, whatever, securely wipe them. There is software out there that will completely overwrite your hard drive or your solid state drive or your phone with random ones and zeros, typically 7 times or more, to completely wipe out any trace of sensitive information. In some cases, if you've encrypted the device while you were using it, you can simply log out, power down, and get rid of the device. And because it's encrypted, it's as though you overwrote it. So there are different techniques. You can always, check online, different resources. There is software out there that will wipe these devices for you. And to tie this back to Linda's question about security freezes, when I first read that question that the person submitted about securing my information, I thought back to when I did one of these very events, talking to clients of an advisory firm, actually down in Orange County last September, and I flew home to the Bay Area that evening, and my wife was getting alerts from her credit card company that her Social Security had been compromised. And I thought, okay, now's the time for me to eat my own cooking. I've been telling people to freeze their credit. So yes, Linda, I highly recommend you freeze your credit. When my wife got these alerts, we immediately, it was dinner time, and I thought, oh gosh, we're already starting later because I just flew home. This is going to be a 3-hour ordeal. We're going to go to each of the 3 credit bureaus and freeze credit. We were done in, I think, 17 minutes. We had logged in for the first time ever, creating my wife's username and password for each of the 3 credit bureaus, and froze her credit. It's easier than ever. You can do it online. It's easy to go in and unfreeze it when you need to. You can even go in and schedule an unfreeze for tomorrow or 5 days from now, have it unfrozen for a few hours and then frozen again. So that ties back to the question of how do I secure my information? Because yeah, we want to do what we can to secure our info, but to some degree, we just have to acknowledge that our information is probably out there through one of these, numerous massive breaches. Just consider that your information might be out there, and instead position yourself to mitigate, what could be done with it to limit the damage. And so, although my wife was getting the alert about her social, I just thought at that point, hey, let me assume mine's out there. And I went in and I froze my own credit too. And I feel really good about that. It was a big relief, actually, probably long overdue. So I highly recommend it.
And you didn't have to pay for that either, did you?
Free,
Right.
direct on the 3 credit bureaus. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're
Yeah,
looking, I'm sorry, Shane.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I recently opened a new line of credit, exactly as you described it. Went online, scheduled a thaw for 1 day so that they could pull my credit and then immediately refreeze it. If you're using the password manager, you'll have the 3 credit bureau credentials saved in there. So it's super easy to go in, schedule that thaw, go back into place when you want it to. Just be aware when you do freeze your credit, you might have that extra step just to allow inquiries when you need them. But as long as you're ready for that and plan for it, it's pretty easy these days.
Yep.
But I think that's
Linda,
also a good point you mentioned. It's not just data on your devices, but potentially info that's out there on the web as well. So do you have any kind of thoughts or advice? I know there's like data brokers out there that collect data on us, but any thoughts on maybe like using social media, how you maybe put some safeguards in place as to what data is out there?
Sure. And Linda, I see your question about inputting your social. Yeah, you might need to put in your social the first time you're authenticating with the 3 credit apps. As long as you're on their legitimate website, it's encrypted, it should be okay. At the start, I talked about the risks, and sometimes it's about bad guys trying to come in and get through our defenses, and other times it's things we do ourselves. And I think what you're alluding to, Shane, is some of the stuff we do ourselves, whether it's oversharing on social media, oversharing with companies that ask for info that don't really have a legitimate need for that info. All of these behaviors of ours have a way of leaking out our data. It's called data leak. And in a corporate setting, we talk about data leak protection and how we minimize this. We can easily do it in our personal lives too. Challenge when organizations say they need, for example, I ran into a dentist a few months ago, wanted to scan a copy of my driver's license. I don't think you need that. And it's not to protect me. I don't want that in your system. Your system might get hacked. We need to push back on these things. All the apps you use, do they need your location? What do you get from it? I don't share my location with any single app. Occasionally, the speakers I use, Sonos, requires that I turn location on momentarily to adjust a setting or something. That's fine. But other than that, I'm not sharing location. For that matter, I don't leave Bluetooth on my phone and walk around with it, or Wi-Fi, because all of these things, they're sending out signals, right? And they're just leaking information about us. So I think on social media, you can also be very savvy about what you share and what you don't share.
Yeah, I think by default, say like Facebook has your profile open, you have to go in and tell it, no, I don't want my data to be publicly available. It should be either just private to me or maybe just private to my connections. That can be really good because we've had cases where we know clients have been out of the country. I think somebody found out they were traveling maybe through info that was out there on social media that has targeted them for identity theft, kind of hitting while they're out of the country and less able to respond to it, as an example.
That's right.
And then we've got a question from Douglas here. I think it kind of ties back to what we were just talking about with public Wi-Fi. What risks are there with using public Wi-Fi, maybe Starbucks or an airport or cruise ship or something like that?
Yeah, Patrick, how about I start on this one? If it's Starbucks website and their Wi-Fi and Panera, that's probably okay. But the challenge is sometimes we don't know. It is incredibly simple to launch a Wi-Fi network, call it whatever you want. I could launch one from my iPhone literally right now and call it Starbucks 2. And folks might be encouraged to log in to that if I'm sitting in a Starbucks. And bad actors have technology that if you are on their Wi-Fi network that they've created, chance exists for them to see everything you're doing, down to that individual keystroke, not just the website you're going to, but the keystrokes, the passwords you're putting in. And then also some public Wi-Fi. And by the way, when we define public Wi-Fi, that's anything other than what you have at your house. Anything on the outside is public, whether it's at a hotel, on a cruise ship. Those are all public, Wi-Fi, and it's just best to stay off of them because we are never quite sure of the level of security that is on those Wi-Fi networks. And if it's a compromised Wi-Fi network, there again, a bad actor could be sitting within that network and watching everything that's going. So for that reason, we suggest that you stay off of Wi-Fi and instead, wherever possible, just use your cellular service. And it is now increasingly uncommon to find a spot where you don't have good enough cellular service for this. And you can also, from your phones these days, create a hotspot that will allow you to log on to that cellular service, say from your laptop, by using that hotspot and allowing you to stay off of Wi-Fi altogether. Now, there will be times you're in a pinch and you don't have a choice. And I think a cruise ship is a really good example of that. So what do you do? We're not suggesting that you stay unplugged, although that might not be a terrible idea to be completely unplugged for a couple of weeks. But instead, you can bring down a utility on your phone, on your laptop. It's called a VPN, and that stands for Virtual Private Network. And its purpose is when using Wi-Fi to secure that communication so that whoever might be on that network has or they're unable to see what you're doing track what you're doing, and so on. And these two are utilities that you want to pay for. They typically range in the $5 or $6 a month range, and there's a number of great ones out there. Some of you running antivirus, if you look closely, they might be offering VPNs as part of their platform. But there too, look for ones that are widely adopted, highly rated, and expect to pay a few dollars a month. And again, the use of that Wi-Fi, it simply masks and encrypts the communication that's happening from that device to the destination that you're transacting with over the internet. And it makes it such that the bad actor just simply goes to the next person, and they typically ignore you because it's not worth their effort to try to get into that stream.
And
Yeah,
I'm
I
looking
think
at
I'd
the-
add to that too. VPNs typically also are available for smart devices, mobile phones. So
Absolutely.
not just PC, but you could also use them on an iPhone or an Android device as well.
Yep.
And
Patrick.
Shane, just looking at the time, Adam and I are happy to go beyond the 1 hour mark if questions keep coming in. At this point, I know we've got a couple others. Do we want to rapid fire through some that came in earlier?
Yeah, one
And-
that we, I think that would be relevant. I'm getting a lot of questions on with AI getting so advanced. Should people be thinking about how they protect themselves from, voice spoofing or things like that, and what can we kind of do proactively there?
Yeah, I think, one of the dangers we're seeing with AI is just that, these phishing emails that I talked about earlier, they are better crafted and they're being distributed in large numbers. So Microsoft, I think sometime early 2024 put out a study showing that, in a certain period that they measured, they were just seeing a tremendous uptick in the quantity and quality of phishing emails. And that's the result of folks around the world using AI to craft messages, perhaps in their native language, have it perfectly translated into their target language, often English, and distribute it at scale. So, definitely all the more reason to slow down with email because those phishing emails are getting more and more convincing. But, it's not just the AI and spoofing that is the risk. People are perpetrating fraud just with good old-fashioned low-tech techniques as well. So we still need, before we get too wrapped up and worried about some sci-fi scenarios that are increasingly realistic, we need to remember just, kind of good old-fashioned operational security. Like, I thought of that when you mentioned shielding your iPhone when you punch in your passcode. The device can have good security, but if you type it in where the person next to you can see, that's not good operational security. And
Yeah, agreed.
Shane, I'm thinking also about a couple that came in at registration. I've got a list if you want us to power through some of those.
Yeah, just real quick, is there a web browser that is recommended or preferred for better security?
I think this is a personal choice, but I know for myself at home, I use a combination of Firefox and Safari. And the way I do it, I've got my password manager connected into Safari. So I tend to devote Safari, and this is a good strategy for folks if they want to consider it, but I devote Safari in my case to websites like schwab.com and my email and others that I'm logging into. And so it's almost like it's not for casual browsing. In my case, I use Firefox for that, where I'm generally not, it's not connected to my password manager. It's really just for casual browsing. When I close it, I've got settings to wipe out the cache, the cookies, the history. And when I open Firefox again, it's a brand new session. So that's my strategy. I like both of those browsers. I know a lot of folks like Chrome as well. I think, like Adam said earlier, with regards to multi-factor, definitely go into these browsers, not necessarily for multi-factor, but just to go into the security settings. They're there. Feel free to adjust them to suit your needs. And by the way, when you're presented with all of these cookies choices, don't feel that you have to accept them in order for the website to work with you. I often will choose reject all, or I'll go in and I'll turn off all but the necessary. And when you do that, be sure not to fall for after turning them off, don't fall for the accept all button, which is often still very prominent. Do the, save choices button.
Yeah, good point. Is it suggested that you use antivirus software?
Yeah, and let me tie this to another question that came in because there was a related one about do I have to worry if I use a Mac? So first of all, um, yes, if you use a Mac, you're not immune. You might be less likely, less of a target for viruses and malware, but you're not immune by any means, and you want to take good measures to protect your device. And so for me, as a Mac user at home, when I get a new Mac, I turn on File Vault. So that encrypts the device, just like when I set a passcode on my new iPhone, that encrypts the phone. You want to encrypt your device, and you also want to turn on the firewall for your device. Now, I choose not to use an antivirus on my Mac at home, but let's shift to the rest of you with who might be using Windows devices. And back to the question, should you use antivirus? Yes. And I would say on Windows devices, it's easier than ever. I remember 10 plus years ago when I would have a personal device that was Windows, I would go out and buy a third-party firewall. I would buy a third-party antivirus application to install. These days, Windows includes Windows Defender. You can turn on firewall, you can turn on antivirus. You just need to maybe go into the security settings and adjust them. But they're there for you, easier than ever, all integrated, even in a Windows environment. And by the way, with regards, because sometimes we get the question about what about antivirus for my phone? Adam and I and our team have long been talking about just good cell phone hygiene includes periodically powering down your cell phone and powering it back up, running through a power cycle. Geez, with some of the iPhones, it's not even obvious how you might do that. You got to hunt for the power off button. And then finally, recently, one of our teammates surfaced a document that had been published by the NSA primarily for their internal use. And that was one of the first times I actually saw the basis for that guidance about powering down. But the NSA was recommending that their employees periodically power down phones and power them back up, at least with the iOS operating system on iPhones. It has a way of wiping the device clean of most viruses or malware that might have found their way onto that device. So that's good hygiene.
The thing I was going to add too is I know it works really well on iOS, but auditing your privacy settings so your apps aren't tracking your location all the time or aren't, sharing mic or camera access, those kinds of things. Pretty sure you can do that on a Mac as well.
Yep.
Auditing those maybe a couple times a year, I think is a good idea.
That's right.
Absolutely. And, we'll keep taking questions, but real quick before folks who have to drop at the 1 hour mark leave us, I think you've got some brochures that you can follow up that we've made available to you, Shane, that you can send to the attendees. There's a third-party site that I like that when neighbors or family members ask me for a list of security tips, I tend to point them here because it's easy to follow. It's part of Consumer Reports, and it's called securityplanner.org, securityplanner.org. And if you click on the upper right to show all tips, one of my coworkers actually, her father just got a new laptop a couple of weeks ago, and she asked me, and I just said, hey, rather than me rattle off all these random tips, like just go to that site, have it show you all tips, and scroll through it and just do some of those things. So a lot of what we talked about, password managers, encryption, if you're looking for a brief explainer for how to set that up in either a Windows or an Apple environment, I think that's a highly user-friendly site.
Yeah, great idea. We have one question that just came in here. This one's probably a little more complex. Oh, hang on, there's some feedback there. Sorry, JC, go ahead.
No. Go ahead and finish that one, Shane.
Let's see, here we go. I ran across multiple emails that have been masked with company emails that are not sent by that employee. What is the best recommendation for users? Avoid knowing it is a valid email. So I think what they're asking is how to detect emails that might be spoofed that aren't coming from the company they purport to be coming from.
You have to be so careful. And this is where our message about really slowing down, paying attention, looking at who it's from, putting your mouse over that URL, because so you can see the actual email address. If there are links in that email, being careful to wave your mouse over them and see where they're actually sending the user to, and just paying close attention. But if they are in fact junk or spam or malicious, moving them out into your junk folder is the best way to take care of that.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Adam.
Yeah, I want to thank the audience. I want to thank both of you, Adam, Patrick. What a wealth of information, great answers. Seems like we could go forever. I don't want to cut it off here. Shane, you've done a great job as well. Maybe we can do 2 or 3 more questions. And I know that people can always email HH or get a hold of your advisor or somebody in the firm, and we can always keep answering this. But great job, everybody.
Yeah, we have some good resources we put together for some of our newsletters on various cyber topics. If anybody wants us to share those, we can grab those and disseminate them. But we are trying to put together more content along those lines for education and hopefully to help everybody just stay aware of all these issues because they're evolving very rapidly and it's hard to keep up with the stuff, even if you're an expert on it.
Very good.
We covered
Shane,
a
I'm
lot
not
of
sure-
ground. I hope that, rather than feeling overwhelmed, that if you had a question, you got an answer to it. And if you simply implement one thing that you weren't doing before, maybe that'll make you that much more secure.
Yeah, that's a great tip, Patrick. I learned a bunch of stuff. I took a bunch of notes, so I really appreciate all the tips and all the policy changes you can do personally to make your data more secure and your privacy more secure. Well, I'm not seeing more questions come in, so again, I want to thank all 3 panelists. A great virtual event. So a reminder, we'll send the recording, and as Shane said, keep the questions coming. This is a dialogue. It keeps changing. It's not something that you fix and you're done. It'll keep evolving, so we'll keep the conversation going. Thank you very much again. Everybody have a great afternoon.
So long.
Thank you.
So long.